Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Mandla Gwetu. I am a computer scientist, and I also have a role in the university where I'm in the IT Steering Committee. And this is an initiative where I've partnered with the discipline, I've partnered with the university, with the College of Agriculture and Engineering PR office, to organize a webinar on generative artificial intelligence, which is something that is making huge waves today. And we have a choice to either be an audience or to be active stakeholders and have a voice and leverage this technology so that we can use it to improve our efficiency, to improve our effectiveness, particularly within university. So I'm looking forward to this webinar and welcome you all. And we've got some speakers today that I'll introduce in a short while. I'm very grateful for them availing their time to be part of this. They put in work to prepare content that is that I think you will find very informative, very useful for your own work environments, whether you're a postgraduate student, whether you're an academic, or whether you are somebody that's looking to go into industry. Before I introduce them, I'd like to just give an indication of some of the house rules. You'll find that our participants will be muted. We will have an opportunity where we unmute, especially when we get to question and answer segments. We would like to make it known that the webinar is being recorded and would like to use it for marketing purposes and would like to showcase some of the discussions that we pick up today because some of them may eventually work their way into decision-making at a time when the university formulates a policy on generative artificial intelligence, if that time comes. So please bear that in mind. But otherwise, please note any questions that you have, and let's make this webinar as interactive as possible. I've got apologies from our dean and head of school, who unfortunately can't make it, and one of our speakers, Kelly Devarasi, unfortunately came down with a cold and has lost her voice today. But outside of that, we still have a very diverse panel, and I'm going to just take the time just to introduce them individually. If possible, if they can unmute and then just say a few words in terms of introducing themselves and maybe share their camera as well. First off, we've got Dr. Kirti Menon. She's the Senior Director in the Division of Teaching and Teaching Excellence at UJ. She's got a vast track record of experience, having served on several national task teams, and is also active in research with a particular focus of higher education, covering aspects such as access, exclusion, and redress. She's a research associate affiliated with the Faculty of Education at the University of Johannesburg. She's widely published in the field of higher education, curriculum transformation, social exclusion, and access. She has a wide range of experience that also covers quality assurance and also regulatory perspectives. So it's a great pleasure to have you, Dr. Kirti Menon. Would you like to give us a sneak preview of some of the things that you have in store for us today and just greet our viewers?
Thank you very much, Dr. Gwetu, and thank you for inviting me. And I will be speaking on the implications of AI for higher education and what it means for teaching, learning, and research. I don't know whether you want me to present now.
Not now, no. Thank you so much. That's great, great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We also have Emmanuel. I'm not sure if Emmanuel is available to say hello, but Emmanuel is joining us, I believe, from Ghana. And Emmanuel is a founder of Unpacking Africa. He's also working for digital channels at MTN in Ghana, and has got a vast track record of experience, having worked with Google, with YouTube, and with Meta, the holding company of Facebook. He's also active in academia, having been a visiting fellow and associate at Tayarisha School of Excellence in Digital Policy at the University of Witwatersrand. Okay, Emmanuel, I'm not sure if you are able to say hello to our viewers and just give us a sneak preview of what you have in store for us today.
No, definitely. Thanks so much, Mandla Gwetu. It's good to have everyone here. I hope you can see me. A bit of a balancing act this morning at work as well, but happy and privileged to be here. And I look forward to sharing some of what we're doing in AI behind the hood, if you will, in my session and discussion on applications for it. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to your talk. We also have Edgar, Dr. Jembere, who's a colleague of mine from computer science. Edgar, the floor is yours, just to greet and tell us a little bit of what you have in store for us.
Hi, everyone. My name is Edgar, as Mandla have said. I'm a lecturer in the discipline of computer science at UKZN. My talk will be giving an overview of what is generative AI, at least from a text generation perspective, and the implications of tools that are based on generative AI like ChatGPT on assessment from a computer science perspective. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Jembere. Next, we've got a colleague as well, Devarasi. She is a lecturer in the fields of intellectual property, cyber law, succession, and contract at the School of Law. She's obviously got a degree in LLB and is currently a PhD candidate. She's also an admitted attorney of the High Court of South Africa and has research interests in intellectual property law, cyber law, and specifically regulation regarding generative AI, net neutrality, and the Internet of Things. So it's great to have a legal mind join us today. Devarasi, over to you just to say hello to our audience and perhaps tell us what you have in store for us. Okay, you're muted, Devarasi.
There we go. How's that?
Great, great.
Great. Okay. Thanks for inviting me. I really appreciate the opportunity. My presentation will start off with a little bit of legalese. We will be looking at some of the consequences of engaging with AI-generated material and looking at some legal issues that then arise, some of the risks. And then I'll be moving on to look at specifically how these particular issues might interact with research in an academic environment. And we'll be looking at it from a more positive spin. So trying to look at how GPT could be used in a positive way.
Thank you so much, Devarasi. And then we've got colleagues joining us from industry, in particular a company called BSG. It's such a pleasure to have Reynolds, who is a senior data and analytics consultant. We've interacted with him closely. He's spoken to our students before, and we're looking forward to hearing from him. Ryan, would you like to say hello to our audience and perhaps give us a sneak preview of what you have in store for us?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Yeah, so we're just going to go through a little bit of generative AI and research, but with a focus on industry, use cases for generative AI in enterprises, data privacy and security in generative AI, and then what sort of skills we'd expect people coming out of university to have in generative AI. yeah, excited to hear everyone on the panel and engage in some discussion.
Thank you so much, Ryan. And thanks as well to the rest of our panel. Just noting that we apparently have a power cut in Westville, so I think it will help, the recording will help for those people that aren't able to join us or that will join us a little bit later on when power comes back on. But then nonetheless, we will respect our program and crack ahead. Just to give you a sneak overview of the order of our presentations, first, we'll have Dr. Jembere, who will introduce the whole concept of generative artificial intelligence, and he'll also talk while wearing the hat of an academic from computer science and talk about some of the challenges in terms of assessment plagiarism. Then we'll move on to Dr. Menon, who will give us perspectives in terms of policy. That's one of the main outcomes that we'd like from this, to be able to influence policy. And fortunately, UJ is a step ahead in that they've already started this journey. So hopefully we can pick a few lessons from them. And then we'll move on to Devarasi, who will tell us some of the research and legal considerations with this whole concept of generative AI. Then we'll move on to Emmanuel, who will give us an example of usage of artificial intelligence from some of the behind the scenes aspects in terms of projects that they're working on. Then we will hear from Ryan, who will also talk to us about generative AI, particularly in the workplace. And he's more speaking to our students and us in terms of some of the work ethics or some of the do's and don'ts, that they would prefer in terms of this generative AI and some of the implications it has to their workflow. Then lastly, I'll have a poll that will be opened, and it would be great to hear from our audience in terms of what the views are. Having listened to the speakers, we've got a few options that we will pose in terms of the direction that UKZN can take, and then we'll have a vote and see how that works out. Now, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Jembere to introduce the whole topic to us. Over to you, Edgar.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gwetu. I guess you can all see my slides.
Yes, we can, Edgar. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'll just be giving an overview of what is generative AI. And from there, I'll give a brief history of generative models, at least from a natural language processing perspective, just to show you a few examples of the large language models, like the models that are used in ChatGPT, those ones which will be used in Google Bard. And then I'll discuss the implications of conversational AI with ChatGPT on assessment from a computer science perspective. So this is my take of how I will define generative AI. I'll say generative AI uses machine learning and data to create large models, and then use these large models and some complex algorithms to generate new content based on the data they are trained on. So the content could be text, it could be images, it could whatever content you can think of. But because coming from a natural language processing perspective, I have a better view of generative AI from a natural language processing perspective. Now, the history of language models, starting from the 1980s, some of you who may have done natural language processing, you will know the concept of n-gram language models. So I'll use that to explain how language models, especially when you want to generate text, how do they work. I'm going to skip the aspects I have on exponential language models and neural language models to move on to discuss some recurrent neural network-based language models and then transformer-based language models. Now, let's go to the concept of what a language model is. I've already said I'll discuss the concept of n-gram language models, and the n here is just saying how many words will you be considering when you want to generate the next word. So if I'm using 2 words, then I have 2 grams. We call them bigrams. If I'm using 3 words, I'll have trigrams. If I have 4 words, I have quadrigrams, and I can use those such a model to generate text. So an example I have here, I took it from the book Speech and Natural Language Processing by Devarasi and Martin. It's an example of a bigram model. So if we have a bigram model, it means we're just considering 2 words at a time, okay? So the model itself is defined more like what I have in this table. So I can interpret maybe the value I have here, 0.33, as the probability of the word want coming after the word I in any given text, okay? So we're saying the word want has got a probability of 0.33 coming after the word I in some given text. And these language models depend on what we call the corpus or the data that you would have used to train the language model. So you can have what I have is 0.33 there. Mathematically, you can say this is a probability to want given I is equal to 0.33. Now, if I'm given something of this nature, what it means is if I've got the word I can sample the words that are more likely to come after it based on their probability of coming after the word I. So you can see here, the word I has a likelihood of coming after the word I of 0.002. Want has a likelihood of 0.33 to come after the word I. It has got the likelihood of 0.0036 of coming after the word I, okay? And Chinese have got 0 probability of coming after the word I. So from this language model, from the data which was used to train this language model, it means we will not have the word Chinese being generated after the word I. Now, if I'm given a language model like this, if I train it on a very big corpus or a very huge corpus, I can then begin to generate or sample fluent sentences from such a language model. For example, if I were to start with the word I can say I've got the word I, which word is more likely to come after the word I? The word want, because it has got at least some probability that's not negligible. So I can have I want. Now, if I'm given the word want, which word is more likely to come after it? Want. This is I is more likely to come after it. 2 is more likely to come after it. So all those on non-zero probabilities have got some likelihood of coming after it. So I can choose to have the word food. Then I have I want. Then if I've got the word food, which words are more likely to come after it? I have I, 2, Chinese, food, and whatever. So I can then generate I want to eat from just this the language model I have here. These probabilities I have here. I can generate I want to eat Chinese food. I can generate I want to spend to eat lunch. You can see some of the sentences I can generate. They can be verbose. They can have a lot of words just added onto them. And these probabilities we have here, we call them parameters. What we do have here, and we usually use the number of parameters to say how big a model is. Now the key question is, if we are to have such a language model, we know that it can, to a certain extent, if I have got a very huge corpus with very huge data that I trained on it, we can, to a certain extent, generate fluent sentences on it. But does such a model understand human languages? Okay. And of course, the natural language processing will say these probabilities mean something. Some of them, they capture grammatical rules. Some of them with 0 probabilities, they capture things that are impossible to happen when you are actually generating text from them. And the answer to the question whether they do understand, an N-gram model do understand human languages, the answer to that is no, because it's taking the words as symbols. It doesn't understand what do they mean. They're just symbols to the language model. It can generate fluent sentences, yes, but whether those sentences mean anything, the language model cannot guarantee that. N-gram language model cannot guarantee that, because it just says when human beings write text, this is how they arrange words. So I can actually arrange words the same way human beings do arrange words. Therefore, such language models like N-gram language models cannot generalize over context of similar words. For instance, if I have got the cat sat on the mat, suppose we don't know which the last word that should come after the word the here. If the word rag was not seen in the data we used to train the model, its probability is going to be 0. Whereas if the word met have been seen and it have been used so many times in the corpus that we use to train the model, it might have a higher probability. But us as human beings, we know that I can replace met with rag. So I can have the cat set on the mat, the cat set on the rag. Okay. Now, in a bid to kind of have natural language understanding in these language models, one of the major developments happened in 2013 with the concept of word-to-vec models. Okay, so then the word-to-vec models or language embeddings are based on the concepts that you can know the word by the company it keeps. Okay, words that appear in certain contexts, they are more likely to have similar meanings. And Mikolov and his colleagues, they managed to create an algorithm that can efficiently learn a representation of words as vectors. So they can represent words as vectors, and then use concepts like vector similarity to see whether the words are similar or not. Now, suppose our vector of words is of size 2, so we can represent our words with a two-dimensional vector, and we can think of it as an XY plot. We can plot the word embeddings in a two-dimensional place like what we have here, and we'll kind of have words that have got similar meanings. And here, like I said, is capturing words that appear in similar contexts. Words silly, foolish, and wise are more likely to be placed close to each other. Bus, van, car, more likely to be placed to each other. These are modes of transport: striking, bright, vivid, expressing how a given color looks. You've got plane here. Here it's different. It's a mode of transport, but you can see this is air transport, that's road transport. Okay. Now, from such a representation, we can begin to answer analogy questions using such a model, and it will such a representation, and it can give us a sense of a representation that understand what the words mean. So, for instance, we can have we can answer queries like man is to woman as uncle is to what, and then it can use vector vector similarity or some offset between vectors to say, if I say man is to woman, uncle is to aunt, king is to queen. These are gender relations. Now, from that development of having a representation of words that kind of capture the semantics in words, or that kind of have some kind of understanding of the semantics being carried in words, we then had what we call recurrent neural network-based language models that instead of using these words as symbols, they use their word embeddings. They use the vectors to represent those words. Okay. Then with such models, we can now begin to have prediction models that says, if I have got the students traveled by, and if bus is one of the most likely words, we can look at the words that are similar to bus, okay, and assign some probabilities to them. That is high because bus have got a higher probability. So you begin to have bus, car, and we have some kind of understanding of the meanings that the words are actually carrying. But somewhere around 2017, some researchers found that using recurrent neural networks, it's computationally expensive, and there is a better way you can use that is computationally efficient, that captures relation between words. For instance, this language model I have here, it forces to say, if I want to get the likelihood of the word, say traveled coming after students, I have to be looking at the word that is immediately before it. But at times, relation between words can have long distance dependencies, and this one forces the dependents to be close to each other, and that was changed when this paper was published in 2017. Attention is all you need. So when you're looking into the relationship between words, you can say the word that is more likely to come after the word by, which words in the history should it pay attention to? Okay, so researchers were using attention with recurrent neural networks, but then they discovered that recurrence is not important. You can just use attention. So that was what was in the paper. Attention is all you need, and that gave birth to the concept of transformers. And what I have on this slide is transformer-based language models and their history up to what we have today. Okay, so from OpenAI we had GPT, which had quite a number of parameters. Remember, I was saying we use parameters to say how big a model is. There were less than 1 billion, but there were quite a number of them. Then we have ChatGPT. It had about 1.5 billion parameters, so it was bigger than GPT. GPT-3, about 175 billion parameters. So if you're using the free version of ChatGPT, under the hood, it uses GPT 3.5. That's what it uses. And if you're using the paid version of ChatGPT, you'll be using GPT-4 on the background. And this one, you've got 1.76 trillion parameters. So the models keep getting bigger. And as the models keep getting bigger, they become better in their natural language understanding capabilities. They become better in their natural language understanding capabilities. So you also have some which are coming from Google. We have got ExcelNet, BET, Palm 2. And we know that Google had been testing the Google Bard, which will work more like your ChatGPT to generate text, and it is actually using Palm 2. Some of you may have heard of Llama, which is a language model for Meta. This is Facebook, the holding company for Facebook. So there is a lot of competition from different big enterprises coming into play, creating these big language models, and then intending to use these in tasks that can actually generative AI tasks. And for text, I think we're having a lot of them coming up, and we're going to see a lot more solutions apart from ChatGPT in a few months or a few years to come. So this is the whole spectrum of what we have on what's happening on the large language models. Now, from a computer science perspective, we can take tools like ChatGPT, that is tools that are based on these big language models, as a learning tool. So students can use ChatGPT as a programming assistant and a code debugging tool. So a programming assistant, if you have something that you have forgotten how it works, you can ask ChatGPT, it can help you with that. If you've got your code, it's not running, students can just take the code, put it in ChatGPT, and ask it to correct some errors on the code, and it can correct some errors over there. They can also use it as a platform for engaging in conversational sessions, because ChatGPT has got the capability of keeping the history of a conversation, so they can engage depending with differing and improving levels of depth of what they are discussing with ChatGPT. You can start general, and you can begin to go deep with the conversation with it bit by bit, and it will be keeping the history of what you would have asked before. It can also be used as a platform for getting comprehensive feedback as the student learns how to do certain tasks. Okay. Let me move on to now discuss ChatGPT and where students can actually use it as a cheating tool. So students can use tools like ChatGPT to sample code for programming assignments. So a lecturer gives a programming assignment, and the more description you give to it, more descriptive it becomes. The student can just take it, put it on ChatGPT and ask it to generate code for the assignment. It will generate it. At first, it might start by generating more skeletal code, but the student can go into the specific bits and pieces of the skeletal code that you would have generated, and it can actually go deep and give more code and more explanations on what's happening. And the student can actually end up having code which they didn't conceptualize, and being able to submit it just from the questions that would have been given. The other way they can use it is to get another student's assignment, put it in ChatGPT, and ask it to sample a new submission from that, with just a few things like change my variables, use this tool use this library or this tool for writing my code. It can replace a certain tool and put another one on the same code. So students, and it will be difficult for me as the lecturer to see that there is similarity between the two submissions. Of course, structurally they may be, but the way the code might have been written, when you go to the finer details, it may all be completely different. And your plagiarism detecting tools may not be able to pick that. So how should we respond as lecturers in computer science? For me, I think we have to rethink the way we do our assignments, our assessments, and especially when it comes to assignments. Because if you give an assignment for students to go do at home, they may perfect their skills of how to use ChatGPT to write code, which is good for the industry, but it's definitely not good for us when we want to have integrity in our assessments. And one other thing we can do is also to invest in tools that can dictate AI-generated text or code. That is maybe what the university should do to make sure that we have such tools to detect whether any student submission has been generated from an AI tool. Just in closing, I just want to mention that as I have tracked the history of generative AI, especially for text processing, you can see that they are very good in giving fluent sentences if you were to talk of it from a language perspective. But the understanding of what they're generating it's a bit limited. Okay, it's a bit limited, so they cannot guarantee that the content they're going to give is going to be correct. Okay, it may look correct, but it may not actually be correct. So that's one thing I wanted to highlight by just showing the history of it. That's all I have for you today. Thank you. I can take questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Jembere. What an interesting introduction there. And I like the words of caution that you gave at the end to say that bear in mind that it's actually not understanding. So use that output that you get with caution. It is possible from time to time to get, things that aren't exactly what you requested for. Picking up from what you said, you highlighted the importance of data. And I'd like just to probe a little bit of a discussion here. I'm not sure if Emmanuel can come through. just to give us an input from his experiences from Facebook and the like, how much of our data, is being used, behind the scenes? We all accept these terms and conditions, but Edgar said that it takes a lot of data. So is that actually happening behind the scenes?
Hi, I know you mentioned my name briefly within the question for Edgar. Maybe happy to engage a little bit. I think for the most, just to allay some fears, we have data that's produced and consumed all across, and it's not just Facebook or specific companies, but all companies now collect some level of information. So if you visit websites with cookies and others, you can find out that your behavior is being tracked in some kind of way. To take a step back, so that I think sometimes when we talk about information for people and internet use, people can get a bit anxious about how much, or this big brother feeling of people watching. But in marketing and behavioral science, sometimes, or especially in political polling, there've always been people, whether statisticians, pollsters, marketers, even in the entertainment industry, right? Your organizations like Ipsos and others who then want to test your pulse. How do you consume products? How do we make products and services more personalized to you? And so the philosophy of data collection really is, to some extent, in the optimistic best form, how do we personalize an experience for you? And I've left Meta. I can't speak so much about data in terms of which aspect, because Meta is such a huge company, more than people realize. So in my experience there, some of the news items, depending on the department, you find out just as we are, either at a congressional hearing or a communique or a reportage, right? Because Instagram was a separate owned company with its own structure, but part of Meta. WhatsApp, separate company with own architecture, purpose, and team, but also part of Meta. And then, for what a lot of people know, including but not limited to, Facebook as a platform, and then Oculus, and then the metaverse, and. So they're generally, maybe to pinpoint and answer your question more directly, they're generally governance forums, and in light of Cambridge Analytica and other scandals, there were internal and external bodies just to regulate the use data that's collected, how data is used. And sometimes the breach may not be internal. It may be access to a data set, sometimes by researchers, third-party people for other ends. So I think, in brief, governance is important, the people who have data. For us, those of us who give out data as well, like most of us accept apps. And I think that's been one of the things about TikTok, for example, where advocacy groups and Congress are saying, hey, do you know what you're accepting when you click, I accept the terms and conditions for certain types of apps, and that gives opportunity for data collection. But I'll leave Edgar to maybe share a few lights. I know you wanted me to add some flavor and context to that question.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that expose. Would like to dive deeper into that, but perhaps we'll pause on that discussion for a short while. Let us move on to our next speaker, Dr. Menon, who is going to tell us about the experiences in terms of policy for generative AI. Dr. Menon, over to you. You're muted, Doctor.
Apologies for that. Can I ask if I can't seem to share my screen?
All right, I'll sort that out just now. Thank you for letting me know. Okay. Is someone else still sharing screen? Edgar, do you want to unshare? Because I can see that Dr. Menon is a co-host.
I'm no longer sharing.
Okay. If this, I'll just try this. If this fails, then I will try and share your slides from my side. Can you try and share?
I think it's not allowing me to share.
Okay. Okay, I'll try and share your slides, and then we'll just try and work together.
Thank you.
Okay. Coming up just now. And then I'm going to share screen. Okay, Edgar, can you help me, give me back host access?
Okay. I'm just trying to see here. It's not allowing me to make you co-host. I think, let me see who the current host now.
Is Dr. Menon.
Yes, Dr. Menon may be the only one who can make you co-host, Mandla.
All right, are you able to do that, Dr. Menon? You just go to participants there.
Yeah.
All right, and then you look for me. And then next to my name, you should be able to make me host.
I've done so.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. And then I'll share my screen. Great. I'm sure you can all see my screen. And then I'm going
Yes,
to
we can.
put this in slideshow mode. Okay. Just clearing this out of the way. Okay, over to you, Dr. Menon. I'll do my best to support.
Thank you. We might need to have robots to help us in the future. But thank you very much for inviting me to this very interesting seminar. And I do apologize for not being able to stay for the entire seminar. I'm going to try and be as succinct as possible. But for the moment, our discussion for today is perspectives and policy on generative AI, focusing on what it means for higher education. Next slide. So I begin by saying there are many ways to think about the advancements in generative AI, and one can, of course, be terrified by this, see it as an enemy, or see it as a friend. And I suspect that just as we had great resistance when calculators were introduced in schools, we had great resistance when we shifted from fountain pens with ink to ballpoint pens, the shift from paper-based to electronic. With all these advancements, we have had resistance, but at the same time, it has now become integral to the way in which we teach, learn, and operate and research in higher education. I am not going to go through everything on the screen. I'm hoping that my slides will be made available to you. But what I would like to say is that as universities, we have to think now about, just like Google becoming a useful tool, we now have to think of these generative AI tools for learning, teaching, and research. And what are the benefits? Firstly, they do serve time. They do have the ability to assist, especially in a country with multiple speakers who are not having English as the primary language. We could use this to improve writing. We could use it for special needs. We could use it to update material. We could use it as a search engine or a source. But what we need to really be quite clear about is that it does require us to reflect on teaching, learning, research, assessment, and how these need to change, because we cannot do this without changing. Can I go to the next slide, please? So according to UNESCO, there are possible multiple roles of generative AI in teaching and learning. So one is enabling students to be able to express ideas in multiple ways. They can pop in a query into chatbot and find a way of expressing an idea, looking at how to develop an argument, that's called the Socratic opponent, how to collaborate, to solve problems together, the guide on the side, the personal tutor, co-designer, exploratorium, a study buddy, a motivator, a dynamic assessor. Now these really, and I wish we had more time because each one of these has to be interpreted and slowly thought about in terms of what we teach, how we teach, and how we also as academics need to change with the times. Next slide, please. Dr. Gwetu. So there are possible uses of generative AI in research. It can help you with writing up. It can help you with research design. It can help you with data analysis as well as data collection. It can code data. It can suggest themes or topics for analysis. One has to be, of course, quite cautious because sometimes if you put things into ChatGPT, whichever generation of that, what you can get is incorrect information. You can get incorrect references, inappropriate citations, false citations, or false data. So one has to be extremely cautious so that while it has an incredible power to assist, there is a limit and there is the necessity for us to be on the guard and careful about how we utilize this. Next slide, please. So the one clear thing is that AI is here to stay. Just as Google was here to stay and has evolved, and just as emails are here to stay, with our emails now auto-suggesting completion of your sentences, as well as on Gmail, preempting who you are sending it to, sending you little reminders, we now know that AI is here to stay. What we are required, and because we are in higher education, I think it really is a case where higher education has to set the tone for how the rest of the world uses AI. Firstly, we are researching, we ourselves are coding, we ourselves are developing large language models, we ourselves are creating algorithms, but we are also major users. And what is required is to be informed, to be transparent, to be ethical, and responsible use of AI is required. Next slide, please. So there are three kinds of integrity. And as you know, at universities, academic integrity features high up on our radar. We cannot do anything without ensuring that the work that we do has integrity. Learning and research integrity, assessment integrity, academic integrity. This itself reverberates, and in terms of implications for the university, one will have to look at codes of ethics, academic integrity policies, policies on plagiarism, policies on citing, how do we need to safeguard integrity within the university environment. Next slide, please. So there's several ways to mitigate the risks of academic misconduct. So for example, when we design assessments, we need to be quite focused on what is it that we are asking and how we are asking these questions. For a long time, and especially post-pandemic, there have been many discussions about assessment and whether we are requiring more and more recall type of questions, or whether we need to move and evolve to far more complex questions that require the individual, the student, to insert themselves into it in order for the assessments to be far more authentic. Should we be assigning more formative assessments? Do we work in class, in group assessments? Do we require students to actually deliberately and with encouragement by academics utilize an AI tool, but also acknowledge the usage of that tool, because that can also make the usage of AI within the teaching and learning environment quite exciting, and also allow students not to be afraid of AI, because you can see the benefits of it. But if we are constantly going to be on guard and we cannot treat AI as some hidden tool which is only available to academics or a limited grouping, we could actually insert it into the classroom, into the learning environment, and use it to our advantage rather than treating it as the enemy. Next slide, please. So what's quite important in what we do is how we communicate in learning guides, in class conversations. We need to be explicit with students. How do you use AI, generative AI? How do you use it in your assignment? How do you ensure that all academics, researchers, students are actually quite transparent and are able to acknowledge the usage of AI if they do so? This leads us to the next, which is a declaration. One needs to absolutely be clear that one needs an acknowledgement of the tools used. Students and academics must take responsibility if there are factual errors or fabricated references. I used ChatGPT for a presentation that I was doing at Senate, and I asked it a question on ethical use of AI at universities, and it gave me a long piece with citations. All the citations were fake. They were fabricated. If I had had to use it in its original without having said, I was just testing out AI, part of what it has given me is correct, but the second part, which includes citations and references, this is flawed. I acknowledge this, and I am also demonstrating that we need to be on the alert that these references are flawed. Awareness. With progress, we are just seeing the first 7 to 8 months of the development, and we have already seen a practice note that I developed for the university at the beginning of the year is already outdated. I'm in the process of updating it because in a 7-month period, there have been so many advances. With progress, you can find that AI tools could become more and more original and far more difficult to detect. So the last point is, while there are no conventions as yet for referencing, what we are doing is that we are using the University of Queensland style for referencing of any AI tools. And that allows you to acknowledge and continue our work with the academic rigor that we expect at university level. Next slide, please. And that brings me to the end of this presentation. But what I think is critical, and I will take some questions, is that we need to think about implications for teaching and learning, implications for research. There are already cases you would have followed last week. There was a case where a lawyer used an AI generative tool in the South African environment to cite law cases. And these cases were found to be incorrect. They did not occur, they did not exist. And the judge had to rule and say, you have used something to generate this, and this cannot be used in a court of law. So obviously, we have to become hyper-conscious of what the possibilities and what can be done with AI, because as you know, our students are always many steps ahead of the curve in terms of technology. In terms of assessment, we need to be rethinking it. In terms of a university, we need to be thinking of the implications of what do we do with our normal plagiarism checkers? What do we do with Turnitin? What do we do with a referencing? How do we expect our students to reference? Because we cannot take the position that no AI can be used. What we can do is to put in the safety mechanisms to ensure that we do not compromise integrity at the university. Thank you so much, Dr. Gwetu.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Dr. Menon. What an interesting presentation there. I like what you said in terms of AI is here to stay, and also giving us some nice tips in terms of safety nets. I like the concept of a declaration. Perhaps if I can just ask one question related to your experiences at UJ, just in setting forth a direction, did you get any resistance? What are some of those perspectives that were perhaps negative towards this technology?
Oh, okay. So I think we can put people into different categories. The first category are people who actually don't know what we're talking about and have not played with Bard or ChatGPT, have not considered the possibilities or what can be done. So for them, there's resistance from the point of not knowing. Then there's the second group that see this as a threat. Then there's a third group that see this as something that can be used and can be harnessed, and we can bring it into the teaching and learning research environment and maximize its potential, but it does require the university's reorientation in terms of rethinking assessments, rethinking how we ask questions, how we frame questions. And then there's the last group that wants it to go away. They just want it to disappear. And yeah, so I think that's what we were contending with. And I suspect that most universities are the same. And then, of course, there is the fact that some AI tools at a cost, you can have the Rolls-Royce version, and then you can have the free version. If you are able to pay, you could have a far better product emerging from usage of it. And that again brings into question whether this is going to create more inequalities, more inequities in our system, because some will have access to the funds to pay for it, some will not have access. So we had some resistance, but what we have done is that we have been discussing this at all the relevant fora. We've taken it to faculties, we've taken it to Senex. I did a presentation to the entire Senate on what it is, how it can be used. I did a demo so that people could see for themselves how it could be used. And we've developed a practice note, we're developing a student guide. So I think that's the way forward, because like with any new tool, we need to actually advocate and create awareness of it within the university. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Menon. What wonderful insights there, especially the last one got me when you're talking about advantage and equality, something I hadn't thought about, to say, as you open it up, are you aware that some people will actually get an advantage because they can pay for, a stronger version? So thanks for that. Hopefully our university will take all of those, gems into mind as we chart our own course. Thank you so much, Dr. Menon. Thank you so much, and we understand if you have to leave at some point.
I have to leave now, but are there no further questions?
Great. I can see there's a comment from Jonathan Parker there. Let's see what Jonathan is saying. He's saying, I think we all agree that we need to move past simple recall type assessments, okay, which is, something that you echoed quite strongly there.
Yeah.
I don't know if participants are able to unmute themselves, if anybody would like to ask an audible question. I can see Soren, you've raised your hand. Are you able to unmute yourself, Soren? Okay, it looks like, apologies, Soren. I think we'd have to wait for Snare to come back on. I have enabled the settings that will allow participants to unmute themselves, but I seem to be missing something. Okay, I'll try one more time. Jonathan, can you try and unmute yourself?
Yes, can you hear me?
Oh, yes, great, that worked. Okay, go for it.
I do apologize for my voice. I'm getting over a cold. I just wanted to thank Professor Menon for her comments. That was very insightful. But further to my question, she mentioned that moving beyond recall type of questions and asking students to generate or design solutions of their own or synthesize new ideas. This is what these LLMs claim they have the ability to do, and have shown some evidence that they are able to do this. So my concern is that that approach, while important, it doesn't go far enough in terms of assessments. I'm from a programming background, and you can ask it to generate code, which you would expect would be an appropriate thing to ask a student in an assessment. So I'm just concerned that those suggestions aren't going far enough.
Okay, great. Let's hear from Soren. Soren, do you have a question? Okay, Dr. Menon, I don't know if you've got any comments to Jonathan Parker's take.
So I think more than asking students to generate, I think it's also about all of us rethinking how we teach, what we assess, and why we assess in particular ways. And given the access to AI generative tools, how do we change the way we assess? So I do know, for example, in our Faculty of Science, they are using it in order for students to utilize it in responding to a question and discerning and figuring out what's wrong with the response. And this is for complex coding work, complex code. So I think it can be used in multiple ways, but that the conversation, I don't profess to have all the answers at all, but I do think that we can explore and think about, and I think it's much more fun to think about how a student can use it. You know, I mean, it can provide great entertainment in a classroom. For example, if you ask it a question like, what is Karl Marx's view of X? You will get a response that might be flawed. And that itself can become your discussion point. Dr. Gwetu, my next meeting has just begun, but would you excuse me now? And I wish you well with the rest of your proceedings. Dr. Gwetu, you're muted.
Hello, Dr. Gwetu, you're muted.
All right, I'm just going to take
Okay,
the
great.
opportunity to say goodbye.
Yes, thank you so much. Sorry, I'd lost host access, so I couldn't unmute myself. Thank you so much, Dr. Menon. It's been such a pleasure hearing from you.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Good luck. Bye.
Thank you. All right, colleagues, I think what an interesting discussion we have. And obviously, we will have different perspectives in terms of different approaches that we can take. But I like the strength of what Dr. Menon is saying, that overriding all of that should be a realization that this technology is here to stay. You know, so we need to bear that in mind as we figure out which way to go. Next up, I will invite Devarasi to come and share with us some of the legal perspectives and also just touching on research considerations regarding generative artificial intelligence. Devarasi, over to you. And Sneh, if she can't share, please assist.
Hi, thank you.
Great.
I'm hoping everybody can hear me. I'm actually tuned in twice because I'm having
Loud
some
and
difficulty
clear.
connecting through UKZN data. So a thumbs up if you can hear me, everyone.
We can hear you. Thanks.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, great. Okay, great. Okay, great. So that's fine. I'm just going to share my slides. Thank you very much. Sorry for the delay there. Okay, so yeah, so I'm afraid that Dr. Menon has covered quite a bit of touched on quite a few of the touch points that I was going to mention specifically in relation to research. So I'm not going to belabor those points. What I will do is focus on some of the legal considerations and certainly some of the points I wanted to draw to your attention about the beneficial use of generative AI within the higher education spectrum. Certainly from a news-making perspective, generative AI has had a very, very good year. A recent study done by our LexisNexis, who provides most of our legal material, in 2022, at the end of 2022, a recent poll showed that the use of ChatGPT and other LLMs for research sat at about 59%, and the use for writing emails and drafting documents and that sat at about 34% and 45% of those people polled. So certainly there are a great many people out there, particularly students and academics, who are making use of the technology. However, it is essential to approach the integration of ChatGPT with much consideration and certainly a perspective on what the legal parameters are or the legal risk factors are.
Hi, Devarasi, are you still there? We seem to have lost your audio.
Oh, sorry, no, I'm still here. Thanks so much, sorry. So as academics and lecturers, there are various factors to consider when incorporating ChatGPT into higher education, namely for productivity and efficiency benefits, learning objectives, didactics, as well as ethical considerations and concerns about the impact on human job roles and intellectual property. That last one I put in because when I canvassed the students of my class this morning, actually, one of the students actually said to me, one of their biggest concerns about using ChatGPT and its use within the academic environment is that they fear that this kind of AI is going to be taking away their jobs. So that was quite an interesting perspective for me. Sorry, my audio keeps coming and going, my apologies. So I'm just going to get to some of the legal risks and implications that I have identified as being particularly important. And as an intellectual property law specialist, certainly ChatGPT has been coming across my desk and my emails more often than not of late because of the intellectual property law issues that using generative AI actually creates. So when we're looking at intellectual property, we're talking about property that is created through use of the mind or the intellect. So specifically, I mean, though on a lesser scale, ChatGPT and generative AI does involve trademark infringement and patent infringement, we are predominantly looking at copyright infringement or possible copyright infringement. So what is copyright? Well, copyright is an intellectual property, it's a property law, right, that protects original works of authorship. So we're looking at things like, academic writing, the creation of music, video, and that sort of those sort of creative works. So what are some of the key issues that we can identify here? First and foremost, I'm often asked whether the actual material that is used by ChatGPT, whether it can be used to generate responses, or where does that information come from? Are we allowed to use it? What are the consequences of using it? Well, the thing to remember here is that ChatGPT, as we know, is trained on using a vast amount of text data, including books, articles, and other written materials, probably generated responses from other people as well. And most of these books and articles and readings and texts and so on actually are the proprietary material of someone else, of somebody who created them, an author or an owner. So certainly if this training data that was used for ChatGPT's creation includes copyrighted works, then ChatGPT's outputs may potentially infringe on the copyrights of those works. So if you are generating responses using ChatGPT, it's automatically incorporating work that is actually subject to copyright protection, in which case you are perpetuating the copyright infringement. So this could lead to actual legal action against you, as you are seeing as being a contributor to the infringement. So can AI generated content be protected by copyrights? So there is a bit of a misnomer here, because certainly a lot of people are reading about this question online, and I think that I need to clarify issues here very saliently. So there is this assumption that in order to be subject to copyright, there needs to be some sort of human intervention. And that is certainly a principle that we see a lot internationally. Certainly, the principle that we come across often is that no, the responses from ChatGPT are not subject to copyright because they are created by an algorithm. They are not created by a human author. So that is why they're not subject to copyright protection. But I think what I need to draw your attention to here is that within the South African context, we have our Copyright Act. And our Copyright Act actually makes reference to and creates a concept known as computer generated or computer assisted. And I'm going to restrict my discussion to computer generated. So if a work is computer generated, that means the work is created essentially autonomously, that is without human input, then that would be deemed to be computer generated. But if there is some element of human involvement, then the work is considered to be computer assisted. So the thing about copyright is that there's no formal registration process within the South African environment. So unlike in the US, you have to register in order to be granted a copyright. In South Africa, the moment the work is created, the copyright vests automatically. So it stands to reason that if you generate data or responses on your ChatGPT and it meets the requirements for copyright, that is originality, it must be original, and it must have some sort of material form, then that particular effort, that particular data can in fact be protected. So it acquires rights and it grants rights to the person who is the proprietor, to whom it belongs to. All right. So if AI generated content has no human author, that's fine within the South African context, because in this instance, in the South African context, the term author doesn't necessarily refer to the person who writes the program. It is actually the person responsible for making the arrangements for the creation of the work. So we can actually attribute copyright protection to AI-generated creative works. Now, we try and seek assistance from OpenAI, as they are the service provider here. They are the creators in essence, or rather the authors, if you will. But unfortunately, we get no help from them because they have essentially said, all rights, title, and interest in the output we assign to the users. So they give with the one hand, and then with the other hand, they also say, no, you have to use the content so that it doesn't violate any laws. It's not particularly specific as to which laws. There's no actual user policy on OpenAI relating to any of the terms of use, really. And if they are, they're rather vague and very confusing. All right, so the terms and conditions are also, as it says, subject to change. So it doesn't carry the stability or the force of a legal right, such as copyright. So it's very difficult to sustain here. So who legally owns the content generated by ChatGPT? So there's two ways to go here. And unfortunately, there's no definitive answer to this question at this point. So it's possible for the copyrights from your data, from your output, your response from that chatbot, to lie with either the individual user, so the person who's keyed in the prompts, or the companies that's developed the AI, in this case, OpenAI. So the problem with that is if you say that the person or the persons creating the algorithms would be entitled to copyright over the algorithms, that would automatically exclude or not extend to the responses generated for reasons I mentioned earlier. So two conflicting views arise. Certainly members of the tech sector believe that copyright to AI generated content should actually belong to the users. So just leave out the developers really. Whereas the creative sector actually want for there to be no copyright ownership whatsoever. So it's free to use, it should be part of the public domain. So is the developer of the AI the author? Now we said the author in South African law is the person who's responsible for making the arrangements that would be necessary for the work to be created. Yeah, but that's not going to really work, because certainly with ChatGPT and some of the other AI generated works, they do so by making independent decisions. So the decisions as to how the work looks or how it functions and so on, they generated independently from any kind of human intervention. So the results from the programs are not fixed, nor are they actually designed per se by the developer. So that brings us on to a second potential argument. Is the user the author? So could that be the more equitable way to go? So we would then need to resort to the parameters that have been around for ages that would apply to traditional creative work protection or protection of traditional creative works. So you'd have to look at how much skill or labor or effort the author had put into creating the work in order for it to meet the criteria of originality as set by precedents in our case law. Only once you've met those tests, so you look at whether there is substantial similarities, if there's any infringement of somebody else's work. In order to avoid that, you look at how much essentially skill was involved, how much labor was involved, how much time, how much effort. And once you can identify that it meets the parameters of originality as set out in the statute, that would indeed mean that the work was original and the user is in fact the author of the work. So it does involve a factual inquiry around every single instance. So every time you look at a possible instance of copyright infringement, you have to look at it contextually every single time. So I actually asked ChatGPT if it was legal to use the content produced by ChatGPT in commercial use cases. So forget about private or for purposes of research. If you wanted to use the content generated by ChatGPT in commercial use cases, what would be its response? And essentially it says, yes, you can, but on the other hand, you have to go ahead and you have to get licenses. You have to obtain a license from OpenAI or any other relevant rights holders, depending on the specific circumstances of the case. So that essentially places the onus on the user. So if you want to use the content generated by ChatGPT to generate a profit in some sense for commercial use, then you literally have to jump through all of these hoops. You have to actually apply for permission to use the information as the AI has indicated from relevant rights holders. Who those might be, of course, depends on the circumstance. The other risks, the legal risks that I've identified, and Dr. Menon touched on this briefly, is the generation of data or content that would be deemed to be offensive and or defamatory. So these are unlawful acts and are prohibited. So because ChatGPT has the ability to generate text that is similar to human conversation, despite that, I mean, it is very, very adept at doing this. It does not, however, have the ability to understand context or application of the sentences and phrases that it generates. So this means that ChatGPT could potentially generate content that is offensive or defamatory, which could lead to legal action against its users. So we have to be very careful there that we don't perpetuate this. right? So what in effect could happen is that you could generate responses that actually constitute or contain material that violate personal rights, like producing insulting or misleading content about persons or people or companies or businesses, or rather unwittingly spread misinformation, which could then impinge on or bring disrepute to a company or individuals. Okay, there's also a chance, though this is often picked up fairly easily, there's also a risk of discrimination based on race and gender and physical traits. So we have to be very careful about how we use the data. One of the central issues of concern, apart from intellectual property, when looking at generative AI, is the right to privacy. So what are the privacy implications for this technology? So again, it's a new and relatively uncharted area of law. So we know that ChatGPT has the ability to share personal data, right, from its training data sets with its users. And what this essentially means is, because it does it without any impunity, this means that it probably does end up breaching most of the world's data protection laws. To this end, we've seen countries like Italy and now probably Germany looking to ban ChatGPT because of what it considers to be its failure to protect personal information. Right? So the way in which personal and private information is disseminated by the Gen AI is problematic, not necessarily from the fact that it's offensive, but rather that it's making personal, private information about users and their health concerns and so on and so forth, the private information available to the general public. So from a data privacy perspective, ChatGPT interacts with various users, which creates the risk that sensitive or personal information may be shared by one user without the respective data subject's consent. So that is key. There's no consent. So there is a risk that such personal information could be used in further training within the ChatGPT context, which means that that personal data just gets recycled and used and reused, and more persons have access to it. Now you'll see that we in South Africa have a Protection of Personal Information Act, and it's new, and we're still finding our feet in terms of how we certainly enforce some of the provisions and regulations that it makes mention of or brings to the fore. So we have yet to see any guidance from government, certainly in terms of how we're going to regulate generative AI, but certainly there are already serious concerns relating data handling governance around user submitted data. So we have a gold standard. We have the POPI Act or POPIA, and it mirrors very closely the GDPR, which is its equivalent in Europe, and it sets the standards for access to personal information or private information internationally. So we're certainly going to have to look at ways to curtail certainly the availability of personal information online, and certainly looking at imposing some conditions for making said information online, and making sure that the service provider, in this case OpenAI, is actually accountable in some way for making sure that at least that the information is going to be made available is known to the actual personal information holder. So the POPI Act creates an information regulator, and just last week, the information regulator released a statement to say that they are actually holding discussions on how to approach the regulation of ChatGPT and other AI technologies so that we do avoid violation of data privacy laws. So incorrect and misleading context. Again, Dr. Menon did touch on this. Need to remember here that certainly ChatGPT is not designed as an academic tool, and its training is not focused on data, really. So there's going to be a large scope for error in its responses. And of course, the fact that its training is based on historic data, it's reliant on human feedback to learn new information. It's trained only up to, I think it's 2021. So it could possibly result in outdated and inappropriate response generation. So it will remain any user's duty to ensure that they review all responses from ChatGPT and make it known to the public. And this is important, that if you are going to be publicizing work or data or creative works that you have created using generative AI, that you make it known to your possible readers that AI has been used in this specific instance, so as to avoid problems with incorrect information, or at least certainly outdated information. I think what I wanted to emphasize here is that certainly for a lot of us, when we are looking at higher level of learning, practice, and assessment rather than a lower level, we need to recognize that certainly ChatGPT can only go so far. So yeah, of course, it can formulate responses to questions and drafts, create summaries and so on and so forth, but it lacks our human ability to reason and critique through logic, right? It's strictly limited to a sort of repetitive learning system involving statistical patterns and regularities or irregularities within a given data set. So we need to hold on to remember at all times that these are the limits in the real world when we're using AI, that it's not going to be able to, I wouldn't say adjudicate, but certainly its level in terms of analysis is always going to be limited, certainly from I'm going to skip ahead now because I have a bit on academic research, and I was looking at how ChatGPT could actually assist us with writing papers and thesis and dissertations. And I was going to focus on these specifically because there is a lot of focus when looking at Gen AI about the negatives, what we need to do. We need to change the way we teach, the way we assess. Students need to develop ethical skills and also be honest, essentially have a sense of integrity, and that's all well and good, but we also need to recognize that it's a tool that can be used very effectively and very successfully within the research environment, and certainly in the law school at the postgraduate level, where students often struggle with things like developing research questions and generating literature ideas, and also just being able to analyze and summarize complex research articles or journal articles. Being able to put the information into ChatGPT and ask it to prompt it to suggest possible research questions and create outlines and summarize texts or cases and provide some sort of level of analysis has been incredibly useful to our students. So we must not underrate the ability of the AI to do good in those circumstances. Yeah, so I think I'm not going to belabor what Dr. Menon said, but I do want to just quickly refer you to what our law students were saying this morning as what were their
Okay, I'm not sure if we've lost the audio there of Devarasi. Devarasi will try and give you about 5 more seconds if you can come back to the audio and just finish off. We can still see your mouse is moving. Okay, it looks like Devarasi is lost the audio there, but I think she was about to wrap up, and I hope you guys can hear me. But yeah, she was wrapping up in terms of the concerns that their students raised, and I like the last one there, that they're scared that AI will steal their jobs. So very interesting discussion there. Are you back?
I am.
Yes,
I am
yes.
back.
I'll allow you to wrap up, yeah?
Okay, thanks. All right. Okay, I'm almost done. And then the students were also very concerned with the fact that, the way in which we use the AI is actually going to impinge on creating or developing skills relating to critical thinking. And as I mentioned, the fact that the AI is going to take their jobs, of course. So in conclusion, I would just want to say that generative AI has the potential to transform industries, but also raises very complex legal issues. And it's important to consider these legal implications of generative AI and to continue to research and develop best practices for its use. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Devarasi, for giving us a legal perspective there. So many interesting insights coming through in terms of who owns what, and also some of the risks to be aware of. I'm aware that we are running short of time, so I will request that we give our remaining speakers just the opportunity to get their presentations. So I'll pause on the questions for this one. And Emmanuel, if you are ready, we can hand over to you. And then after that, we'll lastly hear from Ryan. I'm not sure if Emmanuel is still here.
Absolutely. I am still around. I wanted to see if I probably have been enjoying the discussion just as much as everybody else in terms of the depth and perspective. And I think it was really good to have a flow of implications of ChatGPT and maybe the hype cycle of adopting a new innovation. On my end, I think that I'm excited to share with all of you, but I love what Devarasi did, because she also mentioned kind of like the implications of data use, legalities, and policy. So I wanted to share from a commercial standpoint, part of the commercial use of GPT, generative AI, specifically in our customer care space, and also even more specifically with our chatbot assistant, Ziggy. And I know that it was initially advertised to have some type of demo, but one of the interesting and important things is also like the recognition that because of policy, internal use of data, and because we're still in production, I can't show you all of those things until they're cleared internally. And I think what I liked about from the first speaker, Prof's presentation, all through to the last one, you can actually hear some of the things that we still have to figure out in terms of data use, in terms of mitigating correct and verified data. Also, then something even more important, who owns the cost of the skill sets, who owns the cost of both validating and updating of the data sets, and then the technology. So for me, I would share this slide rather than a demo. I didn't get internal clearance from policy to share the demo, but I can speak to it and hopefully host a discussion with each of you. There's a QR code where you can check out our Digi assistants called Ziggy. The QR code should take you to the website. There's a caveat, depending on what country you're checking out the website or our services. So MTN currently serves in 19 opcos or countries across the world, including Iran and a few other countries. What's helpful to know is that even though we have some group and unified experiences, some of the different countries have features that may not necessarily show up in others. So for this, Ziggy is our assistant that helps customer care. And the beauty of what we have with our Ziggy platform, at least for the OPCO in Ghana, is that it helps us engage with 13 million customers. We have 5.4 customer interactions via our online and digital channels, with live agents responding to some aspects, but then Ziggy automating the introduction and conversation. So Ziggy as a commercial chatbot was only launched last year in March. And we've had Ziggy for the Ghana office specifically, which I have more data than for the other opcos and group. We've had 2,000 users up until December. For us, what's important about it is the use of AI and generative AI is to help streamline some of the requests, the customer value chain. For those of you who may not know what chatbots are, is really just automating the process of canned responses. So you put in a query and we have pre-answered queries to some of what you asked for. But with generative AI, it allows us to be in a more conversational fashion and allows you to ask questions in a way that hopefully with the right data sets, it can give you or send you closer to our product offerings and our service offerings. With Ziggy being deployed, we had a customer satisfaction of 85%, containment rates, which means that we're able to contain delivery from request all the way through success without having a live agent, was 38.3%. So the lesser we had people referring to live agents, the better it was. So the lower the percentage was really good. However, obviously with ChatGPT, the hype around generative conversations is really pushing us to adopt various forms. What I liked about the conversation also from Professor was he was talking about GPT-3, GPT-4, Llama from Meta. All of these large data set module programmings kind of offer different things in different spaces. And the commitment for us to invest and then make it deployable and accessible to users also comes at a cost. And so even though we've started to roll out, if you're listening and watching, potentially Nigeria has one of the more bespoke offering and working through with other opcos, partly in Ghana. The South Africa ChatGPT, however, is still not fully enabled with it, but you get to hear how we are applying ChatGPT, and then similar to the conversations we're having, how then are we responsible not just for the first loading of the data sets, but the updating. And so an interesting exercise we did internally was to ask ChatGPT who's the current group CEO or who's the group CEO of MTN, and depending on when the data set was shared, if there's a change within a month or two and there aren't updates in the parameters and the rules on the data set itself, it could be either outdated data or misleading. And I think a speaker mentioned that as well. How much care can we give to the data sets, even as we add onto it, that it references the right things? I think for us, the customer care one makes sense because it's an introduction to products and services. But as you can see from the QR code, when you check out our websites and for some of the publicly listed companies that have it, once you get into things like investor relations, quarterly earnings, or a publicly listed company, it is important that Ziggy gets some of these references right, because then it could be a bit misleading. And to other speakers' points, because of the conversational mode or way that it does, it could also potentially be misinforming. So for me, in the absence of having an opportunity to demo, I wanted to introduce to you the commercial use for it. I think there was also a conversation about how now really ChatGPT is commercial. So with Microsoft's launch for Copilot, Microsoft's launch for the Power Apps, what Copilot does then is it gives you almost a language inserts and conversational opportunity to update and have a conversation with prompts. So Copilot allows you to build apps, be able to integrate with Power BI and other things. And then we're also looking at it from a customer service perspective as an opportunity for ways in which you can then be able to engage with us and then maybe automate some of our processes moving forward. So yes, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Emmanuel. Wonderful to hear, how it's improving business at MTN. I like the fact that you said 80% improvement customer satisfaction. Totally understand the restrictions in terms of, the intellectual property of the company. which attests to what we've heard during this presentation as well. Thank you so much, Emmanuel. Wonderful insights. And let's hear also from our friends from BSG. Over to you, Ryan. I'm glad we have been able to protect your 10 minutes.
Great. Sorry, I'm just looking for the presentation over there. Can you guys see the presentation?
Yes, yes.
Great. I'm going to try fly through quite a few things so that we leave time for some questions. Effectively, presentation here is about asking better questions, evaluating content, and ensuring data privacy. So just as an agenda, I've got a bit of an introduction, generative AI in research, use cases of generative AI in enterprises, data privacy and security in generative AI, and then what sort of skills would we be looking for in industry. As an introduction, people didn't stop doing math because calculators were invented. AI is really just a new type of calculator. So what do we mean by that? What are we going to dig into? As an idea of what generative AI, and we've got quite an in-depth description of this, it's really something that can generate new data or content. Where we see quite a bit of relevance in the workplace is in content creation, design, and decision-making, and a few other areas. And then there's a big importance on data privacy, as was mentioned, and protecting sensitive information within AI applications. And then there's a high similarity to tools like Google, which have been around longer, where really they both provide information based on inputs. And we'll dig into what we care about in industry around that. So generative AI in research, if we look at some of the tooling, like I mentioned, both of these provide information based on those queries. And that really highlights the importance of asking the right questions. Effectively, the quality of my output is dependent on the quality of my input. Therefore, that shifts that discussion into saying, well, what's my critical evaluation of this information? Sorry, my dog is moaning like mad. Give me 1 second. So effectively, critical evaluation of this information, not all generated content, as mentioned, is accurate or even useful. So therefore, there's a high potential for quality to be both content to be both high quality, low quality, or misleading, as has been mentioned before. But this is already a problem. Both tools, being AI and Google, produce a mix of content quality. So looking at some of these use cases, we've got content generation, you've got this idea of creating presentations, articles, reports, and social media posts, as well as outlines or core structures. You've got this idea of design, where you can generate design elements or full presentations, websites, apps, and even more, and even suggestions on code design patterns from a development perspective. You've got this idea of data augmentation and analysis, where you've got expanding data sets using machine learning models where I may not have enough data. I could ask for counter data points or conflicting data points to the data sets I already have, as well as evaluating arguments in things like emails. Have I followed, have I given enough data points? Have I filled in the right sort of information? As well as summaries or extracting critical points, if you think of meeting notes and things like that. And then if you think about it from a decision support, it provides you insights and predictions to aid in decision-making, as well as the ability to debug errors and understanding. And then in a learning and research perspective, I don't need to read as much documentation to get started. I could have tailored answers specific to my framework or documentation, and I can engage in personalized learning, which is really exciting. when we start talking about data privacy and security around all of these, well, you've got this importance of data privacy and security from protecting my client's personal information, their IP, because we're in a consulting industry, but also unauthorized access. So not only is it me giving potentially a third party information they shouldn't have access to, but what does that third party do with that information? As was mentioned, ChatGPT, as an example, can retrain their models on information I give. If I'm putting sensitive information in there, that could leak out in some of the answers given later. So really, there's this idea of I need to avoid directly putting information or sensitive information into a generative AI input. And really, some of the skills that we'd want to see driving some of that is, how do I anonymize or generalize that sort of question? Are there techniques that I can protect my data by anonymizing inputs, anonymizing types of data, as well as generalizing my question? And one of the advantages of that, which goes to point 4 over there, is this idea that because I've generalized my question, I potentially could get a more generalized and reusable answer from my code generation, as an example, that I could reuse across multiple projects. So these sort of things can flow into each other and actually output something somewhat more useful to me long-term. So what sort of skills would we be looking at? Well, we'd be looking at some technical skills. So understanding how generative AI works, that's sort of more of a general overview. Asking or choosing the right tool for the right job. And I think this is something we maybe haven't drilled in enough in this conversation, is AI is not a silver bullet. And being able to identify when you use generative AI versus when you use other tooling is probably going to become more and more important, where people could use generative AI as a crutch. Probably one of the more techie words in here is prompt engineering. So really the way that I like to think about that is, how do I ask better questions and provide the right context? There were comments of, how much context can be added in different generative AI systems. Well, having a look at this and prompting my question in the right sort of way really gives me better outputs. And then in terms of evaluation, there's critical thinking here. I need to evaluate the quality and usefulness of the AI-generated content, as well as reviewing the content longer term and reviewing the sources around it. Am I asking for sources when I generate that content? Am I reviewing the sources once I get them? And I want to say these are not new things that have come up. When I was studying, these were comments being used around Google and Wikipedia and all of that. This is not a new conversation that needs to happen here. Then creativity. So using AI in innovative ways to solve problems. So how to ask questions more generally and break down those contents kind of play hand in hand, because now I can't pass my sensitive data in. I need to be more creative in my suggestions of using it. How do I integrate that into my system? How do I integrate that in such a way that I don't break those privacy rules? And then in terms of ethics, we really need to start understanding those ethical considerations, being aware of potential biases. That's been mentioned a few times today. And then, the ethical use of the data itself. So I'm just going to take a slight tangent from this. OpenAI is not the only example of this. Red Pajama comes to mind, where they've been very, very open about the data that they present and where it comes from, how they've filtered through GitHub, for example. They've been very open about how to do that. We need to be aware of that sort of instance from the data that's trained up on the model. And that makes it really hard in systems like OpenAI, which is closed source. And then other mentions around ownership and model types. Are they proprietary? Are they open source? Are they hosted versus local? I can handle and do different things depending on those different elements. So if it's open source, well, who else can see that data? If it's proprietary, what are they doing with that data? If it's hosted, I'm sending that data over a network. If it's local, then maybe I can get away with a few more things. These are all the types of things we really need to consider from a business perspective. In a use case context, in the business world, knowing Excel is like knowing how to read. That's from Chris Gardner. AI will be no different in the future. The idea here is that generative AI really improves creativity, efficiency, decision makings within an organization. And generative AI boosts this by automating that content production. It enhances the data, it offers insights, and in today's competitive corporate environments, this capability to produce new ideas and personalize those solutions really makes it valuable. And while sort of unpacking this, we kind of spoke about, well, there's two sort of categories here. There's those who are not really AI or generative AI experts. What do we really want them to be able to do? And what do we want more AI-driven or technology-focused people to be able to do? So non-experts, we really want them to understand the copyright and AI concerns, as was mentioned. I'm not going to hark on that. But I think really the two key points there is attribution and licensing. And I think that's a big point, not just from have I attributed the right source there, but what type of license does this code hold as well? GNU3 comes to mind there, where in a business context, we don't want to touch that with a 3-foot pole. So, be very careful around that sense and understand that. What should we be able, or what should people who are non-experts be able to do is really utilize the tooling, all right? We want to be able to use those tools, use the correct AI generation tool. Things like Midjourney come to mind for graphics, not just OpenAI's DALL-E 2. There's different systems under there that you can use. Recognizing the limitations and potential biases. And there's some really interesting things I mentioned on the chat there, Orca 2 as an example, where they're training the next AI model on the reasoning behind it. So asking ChatGPT itself, hey, have you answered all the questions? Do you know what this means? That sort of context really becomes important. Evaluating the quality and reliability, we've spoken a lot about that. Let's not hark on it. Really looking at generative AI as part of my toolbox. So very much like Excel and Google are part of my everyday life in business, generative AI is going to start to become part of that daily workflow. And how do I integrate that into my daily workflow and decision making? Do I maybe start with that and then break it down and, get 2 iterations quicker? How do I approach that? And then learning basic AI literacy to navigate and utilize the tools effectively starts to become more and more important, especially as things like plugins become more and more accessible in things like OpenAI, as an example. If I don't have that literacy, I'm going to get left behind in how to do this. From an advanced AI professional perspective, you want to do everything that the non-experts can do, as well as refine that model. So basically fine-tuning those models to specific tasks and industries, understanding how that model architecturally works, what hyperparameter tuning is, and what are the other training techniques that can come into play. Things like QLoRa really come into play, where instead of spending millions of dollars on training a model from scratch, it's hundreds of dollars just to refine that model. That starts to become really important to us. And then continuous monitoring. So how do you monitor and update that model without bringing in biases of your user audience so that you become an echo chamber? That starts to become really important. And then to the other side of that is, how do I incorporate or integrate AI into existing systems and workflows? How do I collaborate across different functional teams so that I can use my AI more efficiently and use my system more efficiently, or potentially inform users of my system, leveraging AI, and then pushing that info back into my system. So in conclusion, AI is not going to replace your job, but the person who uses AI will. And then just as a conclusion summary here, the importance of effective questioning, strategies for evaluating AI-generated content, data privacy and practices in avoiding direct input, and then using it as part of your toolbox, not a crutch. Any questions, thoughts? I know I might have jumped through that quite quickly.
That was so awesome, Ryan. Thank you so much. And also thanks for sharing your details there. We've learned so much from you. I'm just going to chat while, if anyone's got any questions, please feel free to raise your hands. And Snare, if you can help us, we've got a poll that we'd like to put to our audience before we wrap up. If that can be released while we do the last few chats here. I've so enjoyed, you said AI is not a silver bullet, and you've showed us that it's not that simple. There's aspects of creativity, ethics, evaluation that we need to take into account. And as well, the fact that calculators didn't stop us from doing maths, so well done there, Ryan. My eyes have certainly been open. I'm not sure if we've got any burning questions, and I'm not sure if Snare, are you there?
Yes.
Right. Has our audience seen the poll? Yes, Prim, you can. Are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, I've done so. Can you hear me, Dr. Gwetu?
Yes, go for it.
I have to commend and thank all the presenters. This was absolutely fabulous. And I'll tell you what I want, which I don't think will be here yet. But when it does happen, Dr. Gwetu, please send me an email. I would like to have a clone of myself online. And what I mean by this, an AI clone of myself, or an assistant or research assistant, is that I'm dealing with multiple email queries that are basic email queries, that if this clone Prim could be sitting, addressing all these emails, I could actually get down to the work that I need to do. So that's just a thought for discussion. My avatar needs to be on my workspace. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that insight, and contribution. Any other takes? Please feel free to contribute to the poll. Anybody who hasn't? Okay, thank you, everyone. I believe we've reached the end of our webinar. Now it's time for me to say thank you. I'd like to thank our presenters. Thank you to Edgar, Jembere, to Dr. Menon, to Devarasi, Emmanuel, Ryan. Thank you for taking us on a journey and showing us the different aspects of generative AI, how it can be used, what to look out for, what are some of the risks. I'd also like to thank the people that work behind the scenes. I'd like to make mention to Vasu Chetty from our academic computing department, who did put me into contact with some of these speakers. Thanks to the audience for coming through, listening to us, and I hope you've benefited from this. And to our speakers, I'd like to say there have been requests that have come through for your slides. They've been such wealth of knowledge. If you are willing to share those, I think people would be very grateful for that. So thank you, everyone. Snare, is it possible for you to share the results of the poll? I think they should be done now. If you're able to share the screen, and then perhaps we can end with that.
Okay.
Okay, so the question that is being posed is based on what you've learned today, if we look at what UKZN should do, UKZN is at a position where it can make a decision, and that decision is, do we want to go with generative AI or not? And if not, Are we going to ban it? Are we going to adapt? Are we going to regulate? Or are we simply going to disregard? And I'm not sure if Sneh, if you're able to pull that up. If not, you can just give us a summary there.
Oh, can you see the screen?
Yeah, we can see your emails there.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Right. If you can see them, you can also just give us a summary in terms of what's got the highest and what's next and lot.
As that's me. And okay, just a minute.
Great. Interesting. There we have it. 79% of us are saying we should adapt, and in fact, we should encourage the use of generative AI, but obviously impose some restrictions where appropriate. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your feedback as well and your participation. Good afternoon to everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. Good day.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Have a good one, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.